This week on the show, how the term open source was created, running FreeBSD on a ThinkPad T530, running away from Windows, unknown giants, as well as OpenBSD and FreeDOS in this week's episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 235. I see you, BSD. Recorded for the 28th of February, 2018. Hello, I'm Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Another week, another episode for you. So we're pre-recording a little bit so that we have something for you during Asia BSDCon. But we have something that's more general Unixy this time for the headlines, because there is a story how I coined the term open source, not me particularly, but that's over on opensource.com.
Yes, so February 3rd marks the 20th anniversary of the introduction of the term open source. February 3rd is the anniversary there. So the author of this post, Christine Peterson, says, I'm the originator of the term open source software and came up with it while being the executive director at Foresight Institute. Not a software developer like the rest. I thank Linux programmer Todd Anderson for supporting the term and proposing it to the group. This is my account of how exactly it came to be and how it was proposed and the subsequent reactions. Of course, there are a number of accounts of the coining of the term, for example, from Eric S. Raymond or Richard Stallman, yet this one is Christine's as written on January 2nd, 2006. But it had never actually been published until just a couple days ago. The introduction of the term open source software was a deliberate effort to make this field of endeavor more understandable to newcomers and to businesses, which was viewed as necessary to its spread to the broader community of users. The problem with the main earlier label, free software, was not its political connotations, but that to newcomers, it seemed to focus on the price, and that's a distraction. A term was needed that focused on the key issue of source code and does not immediately confuse the people who are new to the concept of source code and so on. The first term that came along at the right time and fulfilled those requirements was rapidly adopted, open source. This term has long been used in an intelligence, i.e. spying context, but to my knowledge, use of this term with respect to software prior to 1998 has not been confirmed. The account below describes how the term open source software caught on and became name of both an industry and a movement. So it started at a meeting about computer security back in 1997. There were weekly meetings were being held at the Foresight Institute to discuss computer security. Foresight is a non-profit think tank focused on nanotechnology and artificial intelligence, and software security is regarded as being central to the reliability and security of both of those. I can just imagine artificial intelligence without good security.
Yeah.
We had identified free software as a promising approach to improving software security and reliability, and we're looking for ways to promote it. Interest in free software was starting to grow outside of the program community, and was increasingly clear that an opportunity was coming to change the world. However, just how that would happen was unclear, and we were groping for strategies. At these meetings, we discussed the need for a new term due to the confusion factor. The argument was as follows. Those new to the term free software assume it refers to the price. Old-timers must then launch into an explanation, usually given as follows. We mean free as in freedom, not free as in beer. At this point, the discussion on software has turned into a discussion about price of alcoholic beverages.
Yeah, this was not the intention.
The problem was not that explaining the meaning is impossible. The problem was that the name for an important idea should not be so confusing to newcomers. A clearer term was needed, and no political issues were raised regarding the free software term. The issue was a lack of clarity for those that are new to the concept. So then we get to releasing Netscape, the software. On February 2nd of 1998, Eric Raymond arrived on a visit to work with Netscape on a plan to release the browser code under a free software style license. We had a meeting that night at Foresight's office in Los Altos to strategize and refine our message. In addition to Eric and Christine, active participants included Brian Bendelhoff, Michael Tyman, Todd Anderson, Mark S. Miller, and Kai-Ping Yi. But at the meeting, the field was still described as free software, or by Brian as source code available software. But while in town, Eric used Foresight as a base of operations. At one point during his visit, he was called to the phone to talk to a couple of Netscape legal or marketing staff. When he was finished, I asked to be put on the phone with them, one man and one woman, perhaps Mitchell Baker, so I could bring up the need for the new term. They agreed in principle immediately, but no specific term was agreed upon. So everybody agreed that free software wasn't a good name for it, but nobody had any good ideas at this point. Between meetings that week, I was still focused on the need for a better name and came up with the term open source software. While not ideal, it struck me as good enough. I ran it by at least 4 others, including Eric Drexler, Mark Miller, and Todd Anderson. They all liked it, while a friend in marketing and public relations felt the term open had been overused and abused and believed it could be, or that we could do better. They were right in theory, however, I didn't have any better ideas. So I thought I would try and go ahead and introduce it. In hindsight, I should have simply proposed it to Eric Raymond, but I didn't know him well at the time, so I took an indirect strategy instead. And Todd had already agreed strongly about the need for a new term and offered to assist in getting the term introduced. This was helpful because, as a non-programmer, my influence within the free software community was weak. My work in nanotechnology education at Foresight was a plus, but not enough for me to be taken very seriously at a free software question. As a Linux programmer, Todd would be listened to more closely. So that came down to the key meeting. Later that week, February 5th, 1998, it's hard to believe that was 20 years ago now.
It seemed like yesterday, but it's been some time.
A group was assembled at VA Research to brainstorm on strategy. Attending, in addition to Eric Raymond, Todd, and Christine, were Larry Augustine, Sam Ochman, and attending by phone was John Mad Dog Hall, another Linux developer. The primary topic was promoting strategy, especially which companies to approach with this idea. I said little, but was looking for an opportunity to introduce the proposed term. I felt that it wouldn't work for me to just blurt it out. All you technical people should start using my new term. Most of those attending didn't know me, and for all I knew, they might not even agree that the new term was greatly needed or even somewhat desirable. Fortunately, Todd was on the ball. Instead of making an assertion that the community should use this specific new term, he did something less direct. A smart thing to do in this community of strong-willed individuals. He simply used the term in a sentence on another topic, just dropped it into the conversation to see what would happen. I went on alert, hoping for a response, and then there was none at first. The discussion continued on the original topic. It seemed only he and I had noticed the usage. But not so. Mimetic evolution was in action. A few minutes later, one of the others used the term, evidently without noticing that they had just used a new term they had never heard before, while still discussing a topic other than terminology. Todd and I looked at each other out of the corners of our eyes to check. Yes, we had both just noticed that. I was excited. This might actually work, but I kept quiet. I still had low status in the group. Probably some were wondering why Eric had invited me at all. Toward the end of the meeting, the question of terminology was brought up explicitly, probably by Todd or Eric. Mad Dog mentioned freely distributable as an earlier term, and cooperatively developed as a newer term. Eric listed free software, open source, and sourceware as the main options. Sourceware, maybe I made sense at the time because there was freeware, shareware, and a couple other terms.
Limited functionality after a couple of days.
Yes, but sourceware implies that you get the source code, but doesn't necessarily imply what you can do free with the source code. And that's why I think
it's difficult.
Of course,
and it has to be
technically just means that, again, the source is open, but it doesn't necessarily mean what you can do with it.
Yeah, and it has to be catchy enough to not be too complicated so that non-computer people could also use it.
Yes. Otherwise, we end up calling software like, FreeBSD is a liberally licensed open source operating system.
The whole...
You end up with a 10-foot-long name. Anyway, moving on. Todd advocated the open source model, and Eric endorsed this. I didn't say much, letting Todd and Eric pull the loose, informal consensus together around the open source name. It was clear that most of those in the meeting, the name change was not the most important thing to discuss here. A relatively minor issue, only about 10% of the notes from the meeting are on the terminology question. Mm-hmm. But Christine was elated. There were some key leaders in the community, and they liked the new name, or at least didn't object to it. And this is a pretty good sign. There was probably not much I could do to help. Eric Raymond was far better positioned to spread the new meme, and he did. Bruce Perrins signed on to the effort immediately, helping set up opensource.org and playing a key role in spreading of the new term. For the name to succeed, however, it was necessary, or at least highly desirable, that Tim O'Reilly agree and actively use it in his projects on behalf of the community. Also helpful would be use of the term in the upcoming official release of the Netscape Navigator code. By late February, both O'Reilly and Associates and Netscape had started to use the term. So they were getting the name out there.
Yep. It certainly acquired some time to catch on, but it's certainly now in the in other people's, non-computer people's terminology as well. So it certainly has made the round.
Yep. And then in April of 1998, Tim O'Reilly held a meeting of key leaders in the field, announcing in advance as the first freeware summit. By April 14th, it had been referred to as the Open Source Summit. And, things just changed from there. These months were extremely exciting for open source. Every week, it seemed a new company was announcing plans to participate. Reading Slashdot became a necessity, even for those like Christine, who were only peripherally involved in open source. I strongly believe that the new term was helpful in enabling this rapid spread into business, which then enabled wider use by the public. And a quick Google search indicates that open source appears much more often than free software, but there still is substantial use of the free software term, which remains useful and should be included when communicating with audiences who prefer it. I don't know. Free software only makes me think of the Free Software Foundation, which is very GNU specific. Or maybe, to me, free software used in that way rather than free as in beer makes me think more of the ideology around viral licenses than it does about just the fact the source code's available to everybody.
Sure.
Anyway, the conclusion. When an early account of the terminology change written by Eric Raymond was posted on the Open Source Initiative website, I was listed as being at the VA brainstorming meeting, but not as the originator of the term. This was my own fault. I had neglected to tell Eric the details. My impulse was to let it pass and stay in the background, but Todd felt otherwise. He suggested to me that one day I would be glad to be known as the person who coined the term open source software. He explained the situation to Eric, who promptly updated his site. Coming up with a phrase is a small contribution, but I admit it's to being grateful to those who remembered to credit me. Every time I hear it, which is very often now, it makes me feel a happy little twinge. Well, us computer people, what are the two hardest problems in computer programming are
Naming things.
Cache invalidation, naming things, and off by one errors.
Yeah. Classic.
So, we need all the help we can get naming things.
Yeah. Make it properly and that people can remember it and what it stands for.
So big credit for persuading the community to start using the term open source goes to Eric Raymond and Tim O'Reilly, who made it happen. Thanks to them for crediting Christine, and to Todd Anderson for his role throughout and making sure that she actually got credit, or prompting her to stand up for herself. The above is not a complete account of open source history. Apologize for the many key players whose names did not appear. Those seeking a more complete account should refer to the links in this article and elsewhere on the internet.
Mm-hmm. So now that we know what open source is or where it came from, let's put some open source right on our laptops in this next article, which is FreeBSD on a laptop, a guide to a fully functional reinstallation, or not reinstallation, installation actually, of FreeBSD on a ThinkPad T530. This is over at coffee.net, where the O is a 0 for geekiness. And it begins basically walking people through the installation and starts with, as I stated, the blog post author here, he recently dug up his old ThinkPad T530 after the embarrassing stream of OS X security bugs this month. Although his ThinkPad ran Gen 2 faithfully, here we go, Alan is showing the support.
T530.
Is that the travel laptop?
No, it's my main laptop. It's my T530.
Better, yeah.
It's the one featured in the guide. Or, well, not the exact one, but you get the idea.
Okay. So that one ran Gen 2 faithfully at the time that the blog author was in graduate school at Clemson. These days, he'd much rather spend his time with wife and baby than fighting with emerge and use flags. FreeBSD has always been his main OS of choice, and laptop support seems to be much better than it was a few years before. In this guide, he'll show us the tweaks that he's made to wrestle FreeBSD into a decent experience on a laptop, and maybe Alan can apply some of this on his laptop too, or just check the boxes whether
almost everything works. So.
Okay. So unlike his usual posts, this time he's going to assume we're already familiar with FreeBSD. Yes, we are pretty much, if you've been watching the show. If you're a layman looking for your first BSD-based desktop, however, he highly recommends checking out TrueOS, of course, which is previously PCBSD named, of course. But they've basically taken FreeBSD and packaged it with all the latest drivers, along with user-friendly installers, and or just one, and custom desktop environment out of the box. TrueOS is an awesome project. The only reason he doesn't use it because it is old. He's old, grumpy, and persnickety about having his operating system just so. Okay, personal choice. But FreeBSD is there. Anyway, if you still think or like to take the plunge, read on. Keep in mind, he's using a ThinkPad T530, but the other ThinkPads on the same generation should be similarly compatible. Depends on some of the chipsets that they were using in different models. So here's what you get. Decent battery life, 8 to 9 hours, or more, even more if Alan attaches an external battery pack.
So he says, 8 or 9 hours with a new 9-cell battery. But I have an 8-year-old 9-cell battery. And so when it was about 5, I had to add the second battery to make it last long enough. But now I've taken to replacing the 8-year-old battery with a new one, and that will solve the problem without the extra weight.
Yeah, okay. Okay, then there's UEFI boot and full disk encryption. I think that's also partly due to Alan's efforts in this area, at least the full disk encryption, or at least the booting.
Well, not for UEFI, that was Eric McCorkle. But
okay.
Yes, I did the first version of it.
Yeah, cool. Wi-Fi, there's an Intel Ultimate N6300. Ethernet, of course.
It depends on the model you get. The one I have has the 6205 instead of the 6300. But they both work with the same driver in FreeBSD, so it doesn't matter.
Okay. What's next? Oh, there's of course the screen brightness adjustment, so you can have it a little bit less dark or less bright. Suspend and resume on lit close.
How you get the 9 hours of battery life is not having the screen blindingly bright.
Yeah. You don't need sunglasses.
Or if you're working on an airplane and the lights are low, you don't want the full brightness. It will hurt your retinas.
Yeah. So. But if the stewardess tells you to that they are going to land, then you need to suspend and resume, of course, on lit close, and that works apparently. Making sure that T trusted platform module is disabled in the BIOS. Who uses this anyway? So just disable it forever. There's the Realtek audio inside, speakers and headphone jack, keyboard, multimedia buttons, of course, touchpad, track point, the usual what you expect from the ThinkPads typically. Graphics acceleration with an integrated Intel graphics, NVIDIA card disabled in BIOS. And
that's the nice thing with the T530 is that you have that option. So for years I ran with the NVIDIA, with the Intel disabled, but now with the new better Intel drivers on FreeBSD, because the T530 is old enough, it actually works with the one that's built into 11. You don't even need the new stuff. I've switched to the Intel because you get better battery life than with the NVIDIA.
Okay. So what he hasn't tested yet is the Bluetooth, the webcam, the fingerprint reader, and the SD card slot.
SD card slot works. I don't know if I've used the built-in webcam, but I have used a USB, like a Logitech webcam with it on FreeBSD, and it works. So I'm 90% sure the built-in webcam works.
Yeah, with webcam it's just a matter of trying it out. Okay, and then we basically walks us through the installation. There's a huge list of commands here and of output, of course, so you can compare with your own installation if you have a similar model or the same. And then we have some power saving settings. So this is typically sysctls and loading a couple of kernel modules. Then tweaks for desktop use. So he talks a little bit about login managers that the one that he's using is called Slim. His desktop environment, i3, and how to set up some of the more nicer things like screen resources or making sure that the X resources are set up properly and fonts and stuff like that. Next is X11 and fonts. We had this. And of course, applications. You want to run applications on your desktop because otherwise, what would you use your desktop for? Terminals, web browsers, text editors, email clients, instant messaging, music player, PDF viewer, and password manager are listed. So that's a good start for people who are still looking for certain applications. And then they also know that this works fairly good on this machine.
Yep. They also show how to use the rc.suspend system to, say, automatically run i3 lock when you close the lid on your laptop. So when you open the lid, you'll have to log in again.
Yeah. So these are small things, but they make a desktop experience much better, or a laptop experience. Cool. That's certainly a good resource to get started. And I guess most of these work on other laptops as well. So it's not just two model specific.
Yeah. Other than, I think, I don't think there was much Wi-Fi specific in there, but other than that, most of this would apply to any laptop, really.
Of course, there's not just hardware, there's also the cloud, which brings us to our first sponsor this week, DigitalOcean. So if you ever wanted to try out FreeBSD in the cloud or some other interesting products, then check out DigitalOcean.
If you don't like to have to drag your computer around in your backpack, you could leave it in the cloud.
Yeah. Or if you go to conferences and want to, check out emails or do safe web browsing from your unsecured hotel Wi-Fi, then you do your little SSH tunnel into your droplet, and then the droplet is making all the connections while giving you an encrypted tunnel via SSH back to your local machine in the hotel. But there are multiple ways to use DigitalOcean's cloud for web servers, for company projects to just run certain computing tasks and then switch off the DigitalOcean droplet again once you're finished calculating these. Video rendering, all these kinds of things can be done on DigitalOcean's cloud. And you basically select what kind of droplet you want, depending on CPU resources, how much memory it should have, or SSD storage, because they all run with SSDs, super fast. And then you just start instantiate, and then it will be running in the cloud, and you can log in and use it. And you can also say, oh, I want an application pre-installed on it, like MongoDB, for example. I've been playing with this this week and making it work at our university, but I would have wished to have a click option to just have it installed for me and just have to provide the customizations so that I can just play with it and see what it can do.
Yeah, what's really nice is you can choose how to interface with DigitalOcean. If you like the command line, like I do, they have doctl, and you can create your droplets and destroy them from the command line. If you have to destroy 40 droplets like I did, the command line is so much faster. But they also have APIs, and they have actual example code for you in Ruby, like curl if you're using something else, or Go, or using the command line. And they show how you can easily just, I want to compute droplet, create it, here's the name. Actually, I want 2, and I want them in the New York data center. I want 1 gig of RAM. I wouldn't put Ubuntu, but that's the example. And I want IPv6, and then boom, it's good to go. And it works with Teams, and you have security features, and you can decide who has access to billing and all that. And they just make it super easy. It also works with things like Terraform, Data Center OS, so on.
Yeah, when you really have to deploy not just one, maybe 50 of these to do some kind of collaborative work and then being shut down again.
Yeah, and they have great documentation written by community members. Like, hey, want to set up a CI/CD system with Jenkins and GitLab and BuildBot? Well, just click here, and it walks you through the process.
Yeah, so this is the great thing, because DigitalOcean gives these authors that write these tutorials or how-tos a little bit of money for their efforts writing these. So that's great. Yeah, so check out DigitalOcean and use the coupon code FreeBSD Now so that you can get your $10 credit to get started with your little droplet on our first $10 is on us.
Yep.
All right. On with the show. The LLVM sanitizer stage is accomplished, we hear, from the NetBSD blog.
Yes, so this is more work sponsored by the NetBSD Foundation to bring LLVM up as a great level, very good support for NetBSD. So it says, the author here, Camille Rutowski, says, I've managed to get the memory sanitizer to work for the elementary base system tools like PS, awk, and KSH. I don't know that I would call awk a elementary tool. But anyway, this means that the toolchain is ready for testing and improvements. I've iterated over the base system utilities and looked for bugs both in the programs and in the sanitizer. The number of detected bugs in the user land was low, where merely was one reading of an uninitialized variable in PS.
Okay.
So for a pre-built LLVM toolchain, I've prepared a pre-built toolchain with Clang, LLVM, LLDB, and compiler RT for NetBSD AMD64. I prepared the toolchain on 8.99.12, which is what they call their dev branch that will become NetBSD 9. However, I have received reports that it works on older releases as well, so they provide a link so you can download it instead of having to compile Clang, LLVM, LLDB, and compiler RT for your machine. The archive has to be untarred into user local. However, it might work to some extent in some other path. This tool change contains the pre-built tree of an LLVM project, which is a snapshot of LLVM 7.0. It is a pristine snapshot of head with patches from the package source work in progress branch for LLVM, Clang, compiler RT, and LLDB. So you get quite a few different changes to the sanitizers they fixed. They added fstat to the memory sanitizer and lots of other kind of programmer-specific stuff. But the idea is that by running the program through this, it can find when the program is actually accessing memory it's not supposed to, or other things that might seem like they're working or whatever, but could actually someday, when something else changes unrelated, could make the program crash or be a vulnerability in the program.
It's just another set of eyes looking over the code.
So as part of this, they've also cleaned up the NetBSD-based system. So they've included the internal namespace.h header in libc, and it has hidden the usage of some public global symbol names. For example, strlcat, sysconf, closeder, etc. The purpose of these changes was to stop triggering interceptors recursively. Such interceptors lead to sanitization of internals of unprepared or not recompiled with the sanitizers, pre-built code. It's not trivial to sanitize libc's internals, and the sanitizers are not designed to do it. This means that we're not a full replacement for a Valgrind-like software, but a supplement to the developer's toolbox. Valgrind translates native code to a bytecode virtual machine, while sanitizers are designed to work with interceptors inside the pristine elementary libraries like libc, libm, librt, and libpthread, and embed that functionality into the executable. They have reverted the vadvise syscall removal from last month. This caused a regression in legacy code recompiled against still supported compat libraries. Newly compiled code will use libc's stub for vadvise instead. They're also in the process of preparing a patch installing dedicated headers for sanitizers along with the base system GCC. It's still being discussed and will land sometime soon. And they talk a little bit about the future of their work. These are just in random order, apparently. They would like to, of the quartet, UBSAN, or Undefined Behavior Sanitizer, ASAN, the Address Sanitizer, TSAN, the Thread Sanitizer, and MSAN, the Memory Sanitizers, we need to add the fifth basic sanitizer, LSAN, which is the Leak Sanitizer. The Leak Sanitizer detects memory leaks, demands a stable ptrace interface for processes with multiple threads, unless we want to build a custom kernel interface for it instead. They would like to integrate the sanitizers with the userland framework in order to ship with the native toolchain to the users. They would like to port the sanitizers from LLVM to GCC. That seems like quite an undertaking. They would like to allow to sanitize programs linked against userland libraries other than libc, librt, libm, and libpthread by a global option like MK Sanitizer, producing a userland that is partially pre-built with a desired sanitizer. This is required to run, say, msanitize programs against edit line. So far, there are no operating system distributions in existence with a native integration with sanitizers. There are third-party scripts for certain OSs to build a stack of software dependencies in order to validate pieces of software. They would also like to execute ATF tests with the userland rebuilt with supported flavors of sanitizers to catch regressions. So after this change, the test found that when running, it actually does violate one of these sanitizers. And having the test suite pick that up instead of random users once it ships would definitely be an advantage there. And that way you also don't require every user to take the hit of running with these sanitizers at runtime if you just compile the test suites with them and run them that way. And then lastly, they would like to finish porting modern linkers designed for large C++ software, such as GNU Gold or LLVM's LLD. Today, the bottleneck with building the LLVM toolchain is the suboptimal GNU LD. I think in Ed's benchmarks on FreeBSD, going from LD to LLD for linking some C++ software changed it from like 8 minutes to 30 seconds or something. Some really impressive gains there.
Yeah. Very nice. So I guess the NetBSD folks are on a good way to get this sooner or later, because we covered it a couple of times on the show already. So it seems like they're making good progress. So we're joined this week by Goudi Kitsch, who is involved in CBSD, which is a jail and VM manager. But before we get into that, welcome to the show, of course. First up, tell us a bit about yourself. How did you get started with Unix or BSD in particular?
Hello. It's all about Windows, right? It failed 5 times in 2 weeks for me, 2 months, sorry. And I said to my friend, it was around 99 or 2000. And I said to my friend, okay, you told me about this Linux thingy, and he was using it on a Amiga-based computer. Can it run on PC? Oh, of course. Can it do something? Well, yeah, you can listen to music, you can blah, 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 watch movies. You can go to internet. And I said, well, I'm on dial-up. Well, then you can watch movies. And it was a huge hassle to get it to run. I mean, the dial-up, of course. The Linux worked just fine. And I figured, actually, what he told me is, you can also learn on C++, right? Maybe it's not something you're looking for, but it's fun. So for me, experience of Unix, Linux, and C++ all comes in a single point of time. And over time, I explored. I started my studies at the university at 2000, so it was time to explore stuff, and BSD was one of them. So I tried whatever I could try once I realized there's actually more than one operating system out there in the world. And at that time, I met a friend of mine called Zoran, who told me, I don't remember that, but he told me I told him to switch to FreeBSD, and he's using it since then. Then, because of the university stuff and university software that couldn't run on BSD, I had to run something like a Linux. So I searched for Linux with ports. So Gentoo kind of what was natural choice at that time. So ran it for, I can't remember how long, because I stopped using FreeBSD when it was 5.0 or somewhere around that. And then I started using FreeBSD again in 2016 when same friend of mine called me and said, hey, you know, I'm still using BSD. How about you? Well, sorry. Well, that's okay. We have this thing called EuroBSD. Ever heard of it? Absolutely no. So I'm helping the organizers here in Belgrade, in Serbia, where I'm from. So it's going to be in September, it's going to be a EuroBSD. Wow, yeah. I have to see that. And because of that friend, I was always like spying what the FreeBSD does from the distance. And I was sorry I couldn't use it before 2016. And now I don't have any Linux machines left. So the EuroBSD was obviously was a good conference. I'm totally FreeBSD now. Yeah, and professionally I'm mostly system administrator for most of my professional life. But recently I'm working on Python and JavaScript based projects, and it's really nice that I can have this all the libraries I need on operating system I like more than Linux.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you can tell us a little bit about what you use BSD to do, like what kind of use cases you use?
Well, I know one use case is totally nuts. It's I have a home recording studio, back at home. I'm not home currently. So I'm using it to record my band and record some podcasts that are going to come out eventually. So I'm really, really interested in real-time in audio in DSP. On the other hand, as a system administrator, I'm interested in, well, security, obviously, and ease of hosting, migration, backup, whatever system administrator loves about any operating system. So those two are mostly those two are the main directions where I go with FreeBSD. There are some I teach operating systems, kinda. In a hackerspace I co-founded. So I use it for teaching. Mostly it was a CBSD in the past, but right now we're gonna have to start with PF, ZFS, dtrace, and whatnot sooner or later. So. So yeah, one more thing I use it for is I have this project where I want to improve hardware audio. So I'm building a digital mixer, and embedded programming is really, really nice on FreeBSD.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how many people use FreeBSD for audio and music mixing and so on.
Well, it's actually pretty obvious when you know the facts, but once you get to them, first thing is that what I found out first about FreeBSD when I researched is it a good platform for audio is that real time is almost hard real time. And it's really nicely put if you just Google the FreeBSD kernel architecture, it's gonna tell you what really means to be real-time as a hardware real-time and how FreeBSD is not that, but it's really, really close to that. Linux doesn't work in that way, and for me personally, I don't know if it's my hardware or my competence in setting up a studio or something, but Linux was slower and it gave me more jitters. So from the user side, if FreeBSD starts working on your hardware, the sound is better. The experience of using the sound architecture is better. And as a developer, you have this freedom to develop everything on FreeBSD because right now we have OSS, which is a native driver, but we have ALSA, we have Jack, we have SNDIO, port audio, and all those are bridges to OSS, but you can still use them to develop drivers and be fully portable, which I intend to do.
Gee, this is something that we usually don't advertise for. We usually target FreeBSD for servers and embedded and, sometimes desktops, of course. But the audio production is also an avenue we could pursue a little bit more.
Yeah.
So, talking about CBSD, how did you get first involved in that project and what it is?
In a way, I stumbled upon it. Well, I'm obviously a musician and keeping my system clean so only audio apps can share their CPU, and so there are not so many context switches when the threads are going around, and if you have all your applications on your system and not in jails or in Docker or whatever operating system and containers you use, then it's a less clean, and I got used to cleaning up my system by putting everything in Dockers that I can, on Linux, of course. So when I started using FreeBSD for audio tests, I said, okay, how do I do the same thing? And I was trying to do exactly the same thing as with Docker, and I said, well, this is kind of cumbersome. I see that jail is not meant to be used in the same way. So I said, okay, whenever, in my experience, whenever there is something missing and it's only missing for me, I probably have a wrong assumption about FreeBSD and how some things are used and how it should be used. So I did my research, and I saw EasyJail, I saw IO Cage. There was a warden for some time, and for some reason, I just love CBSD because I read it uses SSH for communication between the nodes. And I said, well, okay, from a system administration point of view, what you really, really desire is to have only SSH open, ideally. So this is going towards that direction. And I said, okay, this is interesting. And then I read more. And for me, coming as a newcomer, it was really nice to start because CBSD has, out of all the commands it has, there are some of them ending with -2e, which is a terminal user interface. So it kind of draws everything, displays everything you need to enter or to choose, because choosing the right, for example, network technology for your jail, how do you do that when you're new? You don't know what you need. Maybe you need VPN, maybe you need, I don't know, something, Vala switch or whatever, and you don't know that. So CBSD was really great for me because even without documentation, which is actually great, I could find my way around it just by using the program, and that I really, really like that. So over time, I started using it more and more. I started poking Oleg, who is a lead developer, to help me with my problems. And sooner or later, I said, I'm going to become a developer on this project. So that happened, I think, like 7 months ago. So I'm still fresh.
Mm-hmm. So for people that aren't familiar with it, could you tell us a little bit about CBSD and what it is and what it's used for?
Of course. CBSD manages my FOSDEM talk. My FOSDEM talk title was CBSD Isolation Manager. I really couldn't find the something that is short enough to be a title and expressive enough. Why I said Isolation Manager is because it manages jails, Beehive virtual machines, and Zen domains, or DOMs, right? However you want to call them. But the way it does it is that you have a pretty nice coherent list of commands. So if I want to create a jail with it, it's jconstruct. If I want to create a Beehive virtual machine, it's bconstruct. So although the list of commands goes into infinity, it's usually 1/3 that you need. It's either prefixed with B, J, or X. So it's trying to manage everything for you in a virtual environment or in jails. It's trying to manage network for you if you let it. It can do it automatically, or you can say, okay, I'm good enough network engineer, I'm going to do it myself. It can automatically set up your firewall once it spins the jail, or, well, it knows only jail's IPs, so it can, when it spins a jail, it can add that IP into your firewall and let it out on the internet. It can manage your ZFS, if it's on ZFS or something else. There are even efforts to port it to Dragonfly BSD and use Hammer, but the jails there are a bit lacking functionalities from FreeBSD, so we cannot say that it's working the way it's working on FreeBSD. So what CBSD, in one sentence, what CBSD is trying to do is set up everything for your Jails VM or Zen, so you don't have to.
Yeah, I remember we a couple of years ago at BSDCan we had this jailbird of a feather session, and I a week ago discovered CBSD's website, and I asked the people who were there, do you know about CBSD? Have you used this before? And everyone else was surprised that it was there, and I just showed them the website and what the features it has, and they were interested to try it out themselves. So yeah, it seems like it's been going well for the project. Are you using it in production somehow or in some other interesting scenarios?
Well, I don't know how to answer this question. It's in production of a hackerspace, so
well,
not business-wise. Yeah,
for
yeah.
you, it's
yeah.
People are using it.
Well, people depend on it. That's production.
Yeah. At least it runs a mail server, so the fact that we communicated through it is proof, if not enough, that it works. But on a serious side, there's a page where on a CBSD site where all the companies, hackerspaces, and organizations are listed who told us, hey, we are using CBSD for this and that.
Cool. So what are some of the things that you've contributed to CBSD since you joined the project?
Oh, breaking
What can we blame you for?
For breaking it. So let me give you a bit of context before you understand how I broke it. As I said, CBSD does wonderful things with magical things, so everything works for you and you don't even have to know how. I realized that system administrators don't like that. What we like is, okay, can you do this port magically and this port leave for me to do it manually? So what I did for CBSD, I really tried to document and to research how do you use it. For example, I use PF, and how to use it if you want everything done magically by CBSD, but you want your own PF, and you want to know when some, for example, jail IP is up, so you let it through the PF and so on. So what I worked on is basically breaking the basic principle of CBSD, which is do everything automatically. And I believe that if we let people manually set up something or via other tools set up something, and we set up all the other stuff automatically through CBSD, it's going to be used more widely, and for me it's going to be more suitable.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. I have some special requirement for my firewall, so I can't just let CBSD run the whole firewall for me. I need to be able to have its magic work, but in a way that doesn't conflict with other things I also need to do.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, lately I'm thinking about, well, I don't know about other firewalls because CBSD covers them all. I thought about PF, and we can even use tables to do some of the stuff which are dynamic enough. So maybe the CBSD will go into the direction of being more coupled with, well, in this case, PF, but loosely coupled, so it doesn't changes your, I don't know, configuration or state or whatever. It just changes few tables, and you do with the tables what you want. Like, okay, we created this interface, or this IP address came up, and we just want to let PF, okay, this happened, now do your stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, certainly interesting. Yeah. It's a shame that you cannot go to VBSDCon because it's sorry, I mixed those up. It's BeehiveCon at Asia BSDCon. So that's where all the virtualization folks and isolation people have their own mini conferences about all these things. And CBSD would certainly be a good talk there, or just introduce that to the other projects. But maybe next
sadly,
year. So.
It's hard to even do like a remote presentation there because the time difference.
Yeah.
But we'll certainly spread the word about the project.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, I thought that Beehive management is, how to say, that there are a lot of managers for it. And I just used CBSD, and I never looked for any other. So when we got call for FOSDEM, for example, hey, how about you do the demo and talk about CBSD and Beehive? I said, well, what's there to talk about? You just press a button and the VM is up. The rest is up to you. Then I did a little research, and I realized that the state of Beehive managers is not as I hoped for. So CBSD became a better manager in my eyes just when I realized that there are not much managers of Beehive, and I kind of, well, I'm a developer on a CBSD, of course, is the best manager for Beehive in the world, and blah, blah, blah. But I was surprised that there's not much more projects, so maybe presenting CBSD there would be beneficial.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's you can tell when you look at the existing managers for Beehive that they're very much the very lightweight design for a sysadmin to do the minimum amount of stuff, because you don't want it to try to do too much magic. And so none of them contain any magic. And for a lot of users, the magic is the part they want, because they don't want to have to learn how to do all of the various bits that are required to make a VM work themselves.
Yeah. You want more magic powder and less white smoke, right? Because all CPUs work on a white smoke. When it goes out, the CPU stops working.
Yeah. Yes, don't let the magic smoke out.
It's already too late then.
You can never get it to go back in.
So, but there was a user question, because we kind of announced a little bit that we were interviewing you, and we got a question that whether there is going to be a CBSD GUI for the command line interface, or if there is something planned in this area.
Again, yes and no. At the current state, no. I think it would be waste of time to start with the GUI right now. We have some refactoring to do, and at this point I think it would just drag us back. And one specific rewrite I want to do is, actually it's not a rewrite, it's another feature. CBSD works by executing commands that are shell scripts. They're actually CBSD shell scripts for portability and some other stuff I'm not going to go into for this question. But we have a shell, and we programmed the basically shell scripts to do whatever needs to be done. And that's CBSD right now in as few words as I can squeeze it into. So what I want to do is create a socket for the daemon. So the permissions, access permissions and communication is standard, like open the file and do whatever. And once that's in place, GUI is much easier to write. because you just send strings there and back, or whatever we come up as an API and a protocol to talk to the daemon. But on the other hand, I kind of fail to see the benefit of a GUI. Maybe for newcomers, but I don't know. I'm split on that, because once you create a jail, what are you going to do with it? You're going to SSH into it or whatever. It's going to be a terminal. So I'm not sure a GUI client would benefit so much. But
Maybe
if everyone...
a bit more on the Beehive side, where the GUI can also spin up, say, the VNC to connect to whatever's inside the VM. But I agree that with jails, it probably doesn't make much sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we already have a VNC, and Oleg is experimenting with Spice. So we can see the machines. It's just you run the command, the CBSD doesn't for itself. So we're kind of there.
So this raises two other interesting issues. You talked a little bit about portability. With the news that Beehive is being ported to a Lumos, do you think CBSD might work as a Beehive manager on a Lumos?
Well, Alan, actually, you're to blame for that. We were actually really, really strict of not porting it anywhere, because mostly the questions were, is it going to be ported to OpenBSD? And we realized, which I said on OpenBSD, but that would be, given the differences in platforms, that would be a really radically different manager, and that would be a new project, basically. But now that I heard actually from you, Alan, that Illumos is importing bootloader and a Beehive from FreeBSD. So I said, well, it's if config here, if config there, we can manage the network. Luckily, by some chance, they also have a ZFS, so we know how to manage that. And
the Beehive commands are all exactly the same.
Yeah. It kind of makes sense right now. Maybe we should consider it. And to be honest, for the past, I think, at least 2 weeks, it's been bothering me. Should we start with this? Because on one hand, I do want a portable project more than anything. On the other hand, it's there's only 2 developers, Oleg and me, and it's a huge strain for us even to maintain stability of CBSD. Now, portability, we really have to think about it. I want it to happen, but...
I would say it makes more sense to focus on FreeBSD. The biggest problem with the Lumos is just it's actually a lot more different than even OpenBSD. And, every time I look at a Lumos box, I'm very lost. What is interesting is to see some of the native Illumos tools gaining support for Beehive and or being ported to support FreeBSD jails in addition to the Illumos zones. So while it makes sense for you to focus on FreeBSD, you might actually get more competition now.
Yeah, cool.
Well, it's certainly going to be interesting to see what's happening on both sides.
Well, actually, we have a one crazy project. Actually, Oleg has one crazy project where he's trying to and succeeded in testing. It's not in the CBSD right now. He used QEMU to run ARM64 based jails, so he can build packages for his Raspberry Pi on a stronger machine using CBSD, of course.
Cool.
Nice. So what keeps you motivated to work on open source projects like CBSD?
Wow. Well, lack of alternative.
That's a good excuse.
So just because you're bored?
No, I mean, yeah, I am bored, but no, it's actually it has a value to it because if I don't know, get bored by a project or have some other stuff or in the future get kids or whatever happens, somebody can take it over. And project these days, I really analyzed where the IT is going right now, and I had a feeling, because I wasn't born back then, that in the 70s, after reading Cathedral and Bazaar, that in the 70s they had huge companies working on software. Right now it's small teams that are working on projects. Well, BSDs being an exception because they are huge projects. But usually people are working in really small teams, and even if it's FreeBSD, which you people know better than me, it's still a small sub-project you're working on. It's not something huge, so it's a few people you're working with. So if we have a really small team and the project is good, but we just don't have the resources to develop continue development, then it's just gonna sit there if it's closed sourced. On the other hand, if it's open source, somebody can pick it up and do something with it, do really something useful with it. And what I found, I mean, every developer has a personal gain in developing open source, right? Because I can give you a snippet of GitHub code and say, okay, go there and what am I doing wrong? Please help me. You cannot do that with closed source code, and that's what motivates me to bring more open source into the business I do, because I'm a freelancer, so I try to persuade my clients, okay, use more open source. It's free as a free of charge. It's better because we can check it out and customize it and whatever. So my personal drive for open source is I just see the benefit of it. Even if somebody steals my code, which people usually say for Apple, they can contribute back. Just, I don't know, remember LLVM or something like that. So what motivates me to work on open source is it's maintainable even if I'm not the maintainer.
Yeah,
You know, it's one of the only ways for something you do to survive in perpetuity is by having it be open like that.
yeah. And it's like passing the torch from one person, and the next person can pick it up and change it or go into a totally different direction, but it's being passed on. It's not rotting out and not being developed anymore.
No.
Yeah, that's certainly a good explanation of why we are motivated in this space and continue working in it.
And there's the most important one. If you want to read the documentation and the code is the only documentation, it better be open source, right? Because we all had experience with a closed source software where you need to do something, and I just need the code to figure it out because there's no documentation about it.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same from 10, 20 years ago, the same reasons. I mean, there are other reasons as well, but basically the core reasons haven't changed much. What other projects are you involved in? Like you mentioned the hackerspace. How many people are going to that one?
Oh, we have right now we have pretty bad weather, and people are lazy to go out.
Yeah,
Right?
I can understand.
When we're blooming and it's spring and autumn, because people are not too hot or too cold, it's around, I don't know, 30 to 40 people.
Wow.
We cannot host 40 people in our space because not everyone come at the same time. And I think if we ever had 40 people, we would, I don't know, break some walls or something to make more space. Right. So the hackerspace is it has, I think, 4 active FreeBSD users. It's all due to me being annoying enough about technologies built into it, so they had to try it. Most of actually 2 of us are using FreeBSD as a FreeBSD, and the juniors, one is high school, one just enrolled into university. They're dual booting FreeBSD and, well, basically doing the same as I did when I was their age, just exploring the technologies. So the hackerspace is, it was co-founded by me and my wife and some other people. So people, if you need a really, really cool hackerspace, you actually need a crazy enough wife to support it. And yeah, I mean, in a way, she's a better hacker than I am because her laptop works only on 12 current. I'm using stable. I'm not fooling around. So she's a 5th member of our BSD community, and hackerspace is it's not only technical. For starters, I'm a guitar player and a singer in a band, so there are some music classes I did back then, and there are a lot of guys who are playing guitars. Unfortunately, no girls who are playing guitars. We have, for some reason, we didn't have to do any extra marketing, and we still have a lot of girls in our hackerspace. Given a new code of conduct that kind of goes along. But it was interesting enough that I think out of 40 people, like 6 or 7 of them are female. So we're probably interesting in more ways than just technical, with 3D printers, with political agendas. I mean, what's going on with Pirate Party, and I would say standard questions that are evolving around the hackerspace. Only this one is I'm forcing it a little bit. It's a more musical.
Oh, okay. That's what I like about these hackerspaces, that people just go there and see different things, and they can learn a lot that they have never tried out before themselves, or get more skills in a certain area. That's certainly the nice aspect, and people helping you and showing you how soldering works, for example. So that's what you not get in a community college or in school.
Actually, we don't have hackerspaces in Serbia. We have 3, and the most recent one was founded last year, I think. I hope the very good friend of mine and a co-founder of it won't kill me because I don't know the history, but we're a country of around 7 million people, and we had only one hackerspace in Belgrade, which is the capital. So we kind of said, okay, this is not fair. Let's do another one in Novi Sad, which is another city in Serbia. So it started as, okay, what is a hackerspace? We have no idea. At that point, we really didn't know what a hackerspace is. And when we found it, we had some friends in Germany, and they told us, well, hackerspace in Germany, if you want to be a part of a CCC network, it's founded in 2 weeks. And we said, what? We didn't build tables in 2 weeks. How do you do that? Well, it's basically because you have this network, and Germany is, of course, huge compared to Serbia. We have all these people, and there's probably even thousands of us right now. And we have this extra technology that we can give to someone. Just say, okay, I want a new hackerspace in, I don't know, Dresden or wherever. And they say, okay, here are the technology, here are computers and whatnot. We have all tables, all the chairs, and so just go on and start. Yeah. So it was a vastly different, although we asked for experience from other hackerspaces, we kind of got, in certain small amounts, we kind of got the wrong advice. People are going to help you. Yeah, if there are hackerspaces, but we were second at the time. So it's always different when you go around hackerspaces. I got used to the seeing, for example, a MetaLab in Vienna, and we try to be in certain aspects more like them. In certain aspects, we want something of our own. So they're big BSD users, so we kind of try to copy them in that regard.
Yeah, that's the actual hacker spirit, and this sort of collaboration is just heartwarming, and that people, do this thing and without first getting anything back or at all of no commercial interests, or just getting the material out or the knowledge to people that want to do this kind of thing. And I mean, apparently there's a demand for a hackerspace, so why not?
Yeah. I mean, for us and for Tilda Center, which is the name of a hackerspace, I don't know if I said it. Tilda Center and MetaLab have a kind of strange history. We met at a conference in Novi Sad, in my town, and we started a mutual project of installing crappy music in the toilet of a conference. And it took on from there, right? So it's not even a project as a project. It was a dumb thing like that. And we just, because Austria is pretty close, we just continue hanging on.
Cool.
Oh, great.
Well, was there anything else you wanted to talk about before we let you get back to work?
Well, there is one thing we usually get as a feedback, and I would like to clarify that as a CBSD team. It's that CBSD is huge, and actually saying any jail beehive or whatever virtualization manager is huge, that's kind of not true, because let me go back a little. What do you do when you're building a jail as a CBSD, as a manager? You set ZFS dataset, you set IP address for it, and download the base jail and whatnot. So you download the files and put everything into motion. You start a jail, and then you move back and don't touch anything. So for a manager, it's impossible to introduce any overhead while the jail is running, or beehive, or anything else. So having the experience of a slow CBSD, it's impossible by design, and not by CBSD design, by a manager design. We cannot add anything into, like, we don't check how much traffic is there or how much instructions you ran or whatever. So we set everything up, and then we let FreeBSD go its own merry way.
So most of the work has been done by that point.
Yeah. So it's impossible for us or any other manager for that sake to be an overhead. I don't know how to do that. I mean, I do, but not as a manager. And the second one is very frequent request. Unfortunately, we didn't have time, Benedict and FOSDEM, to discuss that more. It's about running Ansible on FreeBSD. To provision your jails, not the servers alone. And as CBSD is stable right now, it got its ecosystem around it, which includes CloneOS, which is a web-based distribution of FreeBSD coupled with CBSD, and it kind of has a GUI. It's not a desktop, so maybe it's more GUI than TUI. And second thing is what we're working on, Oleg and I, is provisioning. He likes Puppet, I like Ansible. So Reggae is... Yeah, I absolutely hate Chef. I have a terrible experience with it. But I'm developing something called Reggae. It kind of... Yeah, although I'm actually a metalhead and I listen a lot of trance music, so reggae is not really on my list, but people associate me with it. Yeah, and so I said, okay, well, if people want to think like that, why not? So reggae is trying to be less magical when CBSD, when it's configuring CBSD on one hand, and it's trying to develop the framework where you can develop other provisioners. For now, it only has Ansible, but we will probably merge Reggae and CBSD, which right now has something called Forms, which makes running Puppet more easier. So we're going to... the reason they are split is because we started working independently. I still wasn't a developer on CBSD, so we started working independently on our own provisioners, and now we're thinking on how to merge that code now that we're a team.
Yeah. Well, that seems like a major undertaking, but if you succeed, then we should definitely get you back on the show to talk about that.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. It was very insightful.
Yeah, and hopefully a couple of viewers will check out CBSD or maybe join the project, or at least submit a couple of patches. That would be nice.
Yeah, that would be nice. Thanks for the invitation and spreading the word out. So big thanks.
That's what we're here for.
So we hope you liked this interview we had. Going right into our news roundup section with finally moving away from Windows. That sounds promising. Mm-hmm. And this is over at manios.ca. So it's basically a personal review of how he had to kind of forcibly migrate to Windows 10. It starts with, thanks to a combination of some really impressive malware, bad clicking, and poor website choices, he had to blow away his Windows 10 installation. Not that it was Windows' fault, but a piece of malware had infected his computer when he tried to download a long-lost driver for an even longer-lost RAID card for a server. A word of advice, the download you're looking for is never on an ad-infested forum in another language. In any case, he had been meaning to switch away from Windows soon, so he didn't have an entire plan ready, but now was as good a time as any.
Yeah, it turns out that the worst thing you can Google for is screensavers, and the second worst thing you can Google for is drivers. And that's really sad.
It's certainly not what you want to have if you want to just get some hardware running.
So,
but yeah,
they go on. My line of work requires me to maintain some form of Windows installation, so I decided to keep it in a VM rather than dual booting, as I had developed code and not running any high-end visual stuff like games. My first thought was to install Arch or Gentoo Linux, but the last time I attempted a Gentoo install, it left me bootless. Not that there is anything wrong with Gentoo. It was probably my fault, but I liked the idea of some sort of installer, so I looked at rock-solid Debian. My dad had installed Debian on his sweet new cutting-edge Lenovo laptop that he got from work. He often raves about his cool scripts and much more effective customized experience, but often complains that his hybrid GPU support, as he has Intel NVIDIA hybrid, and he can connect up to 6 displays to it. Anyway, they go on, I didn't want to install Windows again, but something didn't feel right about running some flavor of Linux. Back at home, I have a small collection of FreeBSD servers running all sorts of jails and other physical hardware, with the exception of one Debian server, which had the hardest time dealing with, and it would be FreeBSD if 11.AC wireless support was there. I love my FreeBSD servers, and yes, I will write posts about each one of those soon enough. I wanted that cleanliness and familiarity on my desktop as well, and really love the ports collection. So it's settled. I will run FreeBSD on my laptop, and this also creates a new rivalry with my father, which is not necessarily a bad thing.
Okay, so next up is playing devil's advocate. The first thing that he needed to do was back up his Windows data. This was easy enough. Just run a Windows image backup and it will... Wait, what? Why isn't this working? He didn't want to fiddle with it too long because he didn't actually need an image, just the data, and ended up with just copying over the files to an external hard disk. Once that was done, he downloaded and verified the latest FreeBSD 11.1 release memstick image and flashed it onto his trusty 8 GB verbatim USB stick. Verbatim? Anyway, he's been using this thing since 2007. It works great for being his rewritable CD. He booted up and started installation. He knew the installer pretty well, so he had test installed FreeBSD and OpenBSD in VMs when he was researching a Unix-style replacement operating system last year. So that's the best way of taking the dip. In any case, he left most of the defaults and didn't want to play with custom kernels right now and selected just packages. Or all of them even. The download even then got from the FTP servers from FreeBSD. The only thing that he had the memstick image was that it was limited to the packages they could fit in there. The installer finished and it was just off to his first boot. Great, up so far. FreeBSD loaded up and he did a package upgrade at first just to make sure that everything was up to date. All right, time to get down to business. He needed Nano. He just can't use VI, or not just yet. He doesn't care about being a VI wizard. That's just too much effort for him. That's okay. There are many editors available to use.
I sympathize.
Sure. Anyway, just a quick package install in Nano, and he had his editor. Next was obvious. He needed X11. XFCE was common, and there were plenty of tutorials out there. He won't bore us totally with all these details, but it went to something like package install XFCE and then got the dependencies. We mentioned Slim earlier in this show already, so don't forget to install Slim to make it seamless. There are some configs.
I actually like the TrueOS login manager, PCDM.
Oh, right, yeah. Well, it's good to try out a couple of them, and the choice is good to have. Slim needs to be called once the boot drops you to the login so that you can get Slim's nice GUI login instead of the CLI login screen. And then Slim passes you off to XFCE. He thinks he's following this and is using it well. Awesome. Now that X11 is working, it's time to get all his apps from Windows so that you're used to, or at least the equivalents to it. Obviously, you can't get everything like Visual Studio or Office, so that's not going to happen. But in his Windows installation, he had chosen many open source or cross-compiled apps as they worked better or that it was ready to move away from. And so package install, the usual suspects: Firefox, Thunderbird, HexChat, Pidgin, GPA, KeePass, OwnCloud, and the Transmission Qt5, as well as VeraCrypt and OpenVPN. There were some immediate picks, and they installed right away. There are a lot of them more that you downloaded later, but there are a few that he uses every day. And now his laptop has the same hybrid display adapter config that his dad has. And he chose to only run the Intel graphics, so dual screens are no problem for him. And he'll add the NVIDIA support later, so that's not a priority right away. Importing private keys and loading Firefox and Thunderbird settings. He wanted to get his Windows virtual machines running right away. And he was burning productive days at work fiddling with this. Apparently, he had only two virtualization options, QEMU/KWM. KVM and Beehive. QEMU KVM wasn't available in package and looked really dirty to compile from FreeBSD's point of view at least. His dad is using QEMU with Word Manager to manage all of his Windows Unix virtual machines alike. He wanted that experience, but it was a better choice to use packages. And Beehive was a better choice overall. It's been built in. It has more compatible with Windows from what he's read, and this is true. And Word Manager is currently not working, at least not for him, with Beehive. He don't think libvirt connects with Beehive Remote completely, or maybe his configs are wrong, but he didn't have time to fiddle with that. It's something for later. He managed it got all through command lines and that it had worked perfectly so far. Sorta. There was an issue installing SQL Server and only SQL Server on his Windows virtual machine.
That's a bug with the storage you're using to back the Beehive. So when you start the Beehive, you have to set the sector size of the disk you pass into the VM, because when Beehive auto detects it, it might set something that's too big for what SQL Server wants. There are a number of threads about it on the virtualization list, but basically in the Beehive command line, you can just say, pretend you have 4K sectors on the virtual hard drive, and then SQL Server should just work.
Cool. That's an interesting interaction.
Yeah, because Windows detects the sector size from the virtual device, it can often be 8K for higher performance, but SQL Server doesn't want something that big.
Oh. Okay.
Anyway, there's lots more detail about how they set up the machine in the article, but in conclusion, they say they successfully migrated from Windows 10 to FreeBSD 11.1 with minimal consequences. Shout out goes to the entire FreeBSD community. So many helpful people in there, and the forums are a great place to find tons of information. Also thanks to the ones who write the how-to articles that I've referenced. I never would have gotten Beehive to work, and I'd probably still be messing with my Xconfig without those people. I guess my take home here is that this is not afraid to make changes, and that changes how comfortable I am with the environment. I'm always open to commands or comments and questions. Please feel free to make them below. I purposely didn't include too many technical things or commands in this article, as I wanted to focus on the bigger picture of the migration as a whole and not get bogged down with struggling with xorg.conf. But if you'd like to see some of the configs or commands that I used, he's happy to share them.
Yep, certainly. Good to hear that migration stories like this are more common and are happening well, that people can even make the switch to have their software and applications they are using.
Indeed.
Okay, next up is the TrueOS rules of conduct. And if you think, whoa, this is a long document, well, stay with us. It's short and sweet enough to just read it. It's actually same size or length as the BSD license, almost. Well, we'll see.
If you take out the legal disclaimer from the BSD license, otherwise this is shorter.
Oh, okay. So, what it says here on the TrueOS website is that we believe code is a truly agnostic and embrace inclusiveness regardless of a person's individual beliefs. As such, we only ask the following when participating in TrueOS public events and digital forums. First, treat other people with respect and professionalism. And second, leave personal and TrueOS unrelated conversations to other channels. In other words, it's all about the code. Users who feel the above rules have been violated in some way can register a complaint with abuse@trueos.org. That's all.
Yep. Well, hopefully that works for them.
Yeah. Well, speaking of TrueOS, which is actually good segue into our next sponsor for this week's episode, iXsystems, because TrueOS is a product of them or sponsored by iXsystems.
Yes. So if you head over to iXsystems.com/BSD Now, you can get their ultimate guide to buying a new server for open source. If you need, a pamphlet to convince your boss to let you do it, then sure. But, I didn't.
You don't need to.
It's been very nice to just be able to not have to deal with the hardware. Just be like, hey, IX, I need this, I need that. It was, so we have this customer and they add about 20 terabytes of new video every month. And we need to set up a way that we can keep growing our storage, but not pay for it all at once. Because at some point they're going to prune some of the old stuff and then we're not going to need any more space for a while. So we don't want to just buy a petabyte of space today. We want to be able to buy, once a quarter or something, and slowly expand our storage as we need it. And because we have to have an off-site hot spare or warm spare, we need twice as much space every time we add space, as it turns out. So yeah, it's they were able to help us build a system and design those servers such that they'll be able to grow over time into what we need them. And we can just, every so often, we're like, oh, hey, for this serial number that we bought before, we need another 24 hard drives. Half
just
of them,
in case.
Half of them go to this data center, half of them go to that data center. They arrive in a box with impressive padding that I've showed off a couple of times before. They're already in the hot swap trays, so it's literally just plugging them into the machine and one ZFS command, and now we have more space. It doesn't seem like you're going to get that from some other vendor, right? Like, we have special needs and it's all custom, and it's great to just work with a vendor that can deal with that, whether it's building our custom video streaming appliances or helping us grow our storage on an as-needed basis. It's just been great to work with IX, and, when a hard drive fails, they take great care of us and deal with it. We had a point where a problem with a motherboard on a server in an American data center. We're a Canadian company, we're in Canada, but they were able to arrange to have it sent back to them, have the problem solved, and go back to the data center, and I didn't have to worry about it.
That's certainly customer support, isn't the way you like it.
Exactly. They have the right people, and they know what they're talking about. Just being able to get on the phone when I want and just have a short, high bandwidth conversation about how I want to build my storage for somebody that actually knows what an HBA is and what firmware is and
What's the ZFS you're talking about?
What doesn't. Yeah, who's not going to try to sell me a hardware RAID controller?
Yeah.
Or be like, sorry, we don't sell systems that have hot swappable drive bays and don't have an overly expensive RAID controller with weird firmware.
But if you're in a not so big server space yet, you can also check out iXsystems FreeNAS Mini or Mini XL for home or office use. That's certainly a nice way to back up your files and keep also a little bit expanding as your data grows. Yeah, so check out iXsystems and call them if you have a server to build for open source, and they will certainly make you a good package for in hardware and price-wise. Okay, and next up in our little stories here, we have FreeBSD, the unknown giant. That sounds interesting enough. It's not a sleeping giant, certainly, but it's an unknown giant so far, at least to this blog.
So this is kind of a thank you post that somebody wrote. I said, I decided to write this article as gratitude for the recent fast answers from the FreeBSD and TrueOS community to my questions and doubts about BSD. I was impressed with how fast they tried to help me and with the operating system which they had used in the past, in the early 2000s, but recently just got back to. And I would say, a lot has changed in BSD in the last 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
So they say, I was looking around the internet trying to do some research about recent information about FreeBSD and other versions or easier spins like PCBSD, which it turns out is now called TrueOS. I used to be a Windows and Mac user for many years until about 2014 when I decided to use Linux as my desktop OS, just because I wanted to use something different. I always wanted to use Unix or a Unix-like operating system, but nowadays my main objective is to learn more about these operating systems, whether it's Debian or FreeBSD. FreeBSD has similarities with Linux, with two major differences in scope and licensing. FreeBSD maintains a complete operating system, so that's the project delivers a kernel, the device drivers, the userland utilities, the documentation, all of that, as opposed to Linux, where they develop a kernel and drivers only, and then third parties bundle that with software to make an operating system. The FreeBSD source code is generally released under a permissive BSD license, like we like to call copy free, whereas Linux is under the copy left GPL license, which is viral. But why do I call FreeBSD the unknown giant? Because the code base in this operating system has been used by other companies to develop their own operating system for products, whether those are computers, their game consoles, storage appliances, firewalls, email virus scanners, network scanners and monitoring of security appliances and intercept appliances, load balancers, video servers, and like we talked about, game consoles, all kinds of stuff. So many people now will learn that not only is Linux is everywhere, but also that FreeBSD is everywhere too. You just don't hear about it as much.
Yeah, we'll fly a little bit under the radar.
They managed to stumble across a bit of information that I was unaware of.
Which is?
That is, speaking of movies, do you remember the movie The Matrix?
Yes, Neo, I do.
Well, did you know that FreeBSD was used to render that?
And it was been before my time. I joined the
Yeah, it was
project.
before my time. And when I found a page about it on freebsd.org, I was like, huh? And then I found video of Matt Olander talking about it, and I was like, "Brr."
Ooh.
Yes. So the photorealistic surroundings generated during the bullet time scenes and the linear interpolation filled in with the gaps of the still images to produce a fluent dynamic motion. The computer-generated lead-in and lead-out slides were all filled in between frames in sequences to get the illusion of orbiting the scene. So if you ever saw some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, they had cameras kind of set up in a circle. And they would just take still pictures, and then they used computers to stitch that together and make the swoosh and all the effects and to fill in a background so you didn't see the other cameras.
I just have to watch the movies again just to appreciate the machines behind it.
But it turns out the company, Manix Visual Effects, used a cluster farm running FreeBSD to render all those visual effects. They actually have a quote here in the press release saying that we came to the point in the production where we realized that we did not have enough computing power in our existing SGI infrastructure to get through the CD intensive sequences. It was at this point that we decided on going with FreeBSD based solution due to the ability to get the hardware quickly, as well as the reliability and ease of administration that FreeBSD provided us. Working with Dell, we purchased 32 of the high-end systems on a Wednesday and had them rendering video by Saturday. It was truly an amazing effort on everyone's part, and I don't believe it would have been possible had we chosen to go with any other operating system.
Oh, see. And also Matrix brings us into Tank, which is ZFS's default example pool name, but yeah, that's a whole different story.
The original example pool names in ZFS are all named after characters in the Matrix, and it just so happens that the one in the man page is named Tank, and people assume it means tank as in storage or something, but no, the original two were Tank and Dozer, the pair of brothers on the Nebuchadnezzar.
Yep.
Anyway, in conclusion, they say, I hope that I give a good reference, information, and now many people understand why I'm going to use FreeBSD to do some of the more difficult stuff like music and 3D animation and so on, instead of using a Mac or Windows.
Yep. Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
While we're on the subject of, unknown giants or systems we haven't heard about in a while, there is an article here, OpenBSD and FreeDOS versus the hell in earth. So it starts off with, yes, sir, yes, our family, composed now until up until now, OpenBSD, Alpine Linux, and Docker is rapidly growing. And yes, sir, yes, all together we're fighting against your best friends, the infamous, the ugliest, the worst, the dudes called the privacy cannibals. Do you know what I mean, sir? Sure, yeah, we're working hard no matter what time it is, no matter in what part in the world we are, no matter if we've got no money. We perfectly know what you cannot do against the true. And we're doing our best to expand our true. Our doors are open to all the good guys. There's a lot here, but our brains was FSCK'd by your shit TV, your fake news, your laws, etc., etc. We're alive. We're here to fight against you. So this sounds kind of a cry to rally. Tonight, yes, it's a Friday night, and we're working. We're ready to welcome with open arms an old guy. His experience will give us more power. Welcome to FreeDOS. But why we want to build a bootable USB stick with FreeDOS under our strong OpenBSD? The answer is, as usual, to fight against the privacy cannibals. So more than 1 decade ago, the old BIOS was silently replaced by the more capable and advanced UEFI. This is absolutely normal because of the pass of the years and exponential growth of the power of our personal computers. UEFI is a complex system. It's like a standalone system operative with direct access to every component of our, yes, it's not our machine. But wait a moment. Do you know how to use it? Do you ever know that it exists? And one more thing, is it secure? The answer to this question is totally insane. No, it's not secure. The idea is good. The company that started the theory is one of the most important in it. It's Intel, in their point of view, of course. The history is very large, and obviously we're going to go very deep in it, but trust me, UEFI and the various friends of it, like the management engine, the TPM, are insecure and closed source, like the hell on earth. So they walk us through creating a FreeDOS bootable USB image under OpenBSD by preparing the folder on called FreeDOS, and then download the images for that, and then use DoS to create the DOSFS tools and a couple of other tools to make this extractable. Then make some modifications to it. Then create, using DD, a new image towards it's just an image at first on the disk, and later on you create a FAT file system out of that to create the system that the FreeDOS can boot from.
Yeah, so it looks like what they managed to do is take the Windows-only BIOS update files and using some Unix tool, extract the bits out of it, and actually set it up with the AFU-DOS BIOS updater and create a FreeDOS image to update their BIOS without having to have Windows.
Yeah. I can see this because some of the servers only take certain Linux systems or Windows or DOS. So you have some other system like the BSDs installed on your servers, and you don't want to just reinstall this with just a DOS or Windows just for doing the upgrades or the firmware upgrades. Mm-hmm. So a bootable FreeDOS stick might be something that can help you here. And this is basically walking you through how to create one.
Yeah, but it's also just actually extracting the firmware image from the Windows BIOS update installer so that you can do it with FreeDOS. Quite interesting.
Excellent. Yeah, this might be something we have to try out in case we have this urge to upgrade our firmware.
Well, especially since most Intel machines are going to be getting a BIOS update as part of the Spectrum meltdown fixes.
Yeah, it's still not solved. I think
this is going to become a much bigger thing.
So, time to get into the beastie bits for this week. First up, we start with NetBSD, a modern operating system for your retro battle station, by our friend Sevan.
Yes, if you have an older machine and you want it to still work, especially if it's exotic, like a Spark or an Amiga or something, NetBSD is definitely the thing you want.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we have some interesting stats. They broke down the results from the Wi-Fi at FOSDEM by unique MAC address and found that while we saw lots of Android devices and some Linux devices, and lots of Darwin devices, it seems like a lot of MacBooks. because iPhones were kind of separately, and Mac OS X was also separate, so that Darwin number is slightly confusing. 679 Windows machines, some watchOS, some Chrome OS, and looks like OpenBSD edged out FreeBSD by 1.
Oh, well. Together, it's more than some of the other unknown ones.
Yes, and I'm sure Illumos was in there somewhere, because we were beside the Illumos booth, and they had a couple of Illumos laptops going.
Yeah, making good progress in this area.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, up next is an update on 2 pledge-related changes by Theo Durrett on OpenBSD Tech. He writes, I wanted to give an update that the 2 pledge-related changes are being worked on. The semantics and integration are complicated, so it is taking some time. So one is exec promises. This will become the second argument of pledge. This allows one to set the pledge for a new image after pledge exec allows exec VE. A warning though, utilizing this in software isn't as easy as you might think. The fork and exec and startup sequences need to be studied quite carefully to ensure the newly executed children don't ask for more than the parents' exec promises. In his experiments, such a circumstance is exceedingly common, so the problem is eased by introducing a new pledge feature which allows pledge violations to return enosis on such rather or killing the process. This feature also needs to be used with great caution, especially in privileged programs, because programs which fail to observe errors may continue operating forward very incorrectly. You've lost the ability to catch it failing and provide care by fixing the problem. Mm-hmm. The other is the pledge paths. The semantics are still being tuned a bit. Before the first call to pledge in the process, one can pledge path those directories. Then later, after pledge has been called, file access operations only work if the traversal of the path crosses one of those pre-declared directories. But better make sure you don't move a directory because the kernel remembers reasons about the vnode of the directory rather than the path. Something similar is being worked on for files, but we are still adjusting that as well as a flag parameter for the pledge path call, which may constrain the operations done on such files. As such, pledge path will become a file system containment mechanism unlike change_root, because paths will still be based upon true / or this way. Patience is his last closing in this message. So yeah, they're still happening in pledge. So we'll keep you updated if we know more.
Yep, and there's a little bit more on the exec promises in the second mail post.
Okay. Oh yeah, we also have slides for BSD from scratch, from source to operating system with ease on NetBSD, again by Sevan, so he's keeping busy. That's good. So you can look at this presentation if you're interested in how to build your operating system from scratch with NetBSD.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certainly pictures in there from and examples, hardware. So if you're interested in NetBSD on interesting hardware and building it from scratch, then check out that presentation.
Yep.
And last but not least, goodbye, LastPath, you're fired.
Yes. This is a blog post from Peter Wem, FreeBSD developer. I mostly included it because it's his search for a password manager that works well under FreeBSD, but is also spouse approved.
Oh.
So provides enough security to satisfy Peter's considerable paranoia, but enough ease of use for the rest of his family to still use it.
Okay.
So he'd been using LastPass for about 5 years, but has changed over. And all the details are in there. It's worth checking out if you're looking for a password manager.
Yep, to keep things secure.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of keeping things secure, before we go on to our feedback and questions section, we should mention our sponsor for that part, which is Tarsnap, which also keeps your backup secure in the cloud. The way it does that is encrypts it locally with the key that only you have and never leaves your computer, and then the encrypted backups are being stored in Amazon's AWS cloud, where they are sit next to each other's people's laptops, backups, and no one can read them because they're all encrypted, and you're the only person, hopefully, to give out or use the key to decrypt them.
Yes, because of the way S3 works for storage in the cloud, anybody's cloud really, is there's lots of replication and backups and copies and stuff that happen. So you can never be sure you've completely deleted data. Even if it's on your own hard drive, short of grinding the hard drive into dust, you can never be sure it's completely gone. But if it's encrypted and say you have the only copy of the key and you destroy that, then you can be sure no one can read it.
Yeah.
As long as the cryptography holds up, there's no way to read it without the key, and you destroyed the key, so not even you have the key now. But what makes Tarsnap different is that you get the source code for the client, so you know exactly what it's doing, and you can compile it yourself and make sure nothing else is happening. And it's the only way to be sure that your backups are actually secure, is to be able to actually see what's happening under the lid in the client and make sure the client's never sending the private key somewhere. So Tarsnap is the only way to have secure backups. Do remember, because it's secure, it's your responsibility to retain that key. So you probably want to print it and laminate it and put it in a safe place. Like not your house, like a really safe place. Because you'll need it if you want to get your data back. And if you don't have it, you can't get your data back. But that's on purpose, because it's the only way to make sure no one else can get your data back.
And if you hear Tarsnap, then you think, whoa, is it based on or similar to the tar command on Unix? Yes, it is. It has similar, or very similar actually, command line utilities. You just use Tarsnap as the command instead of tar. And then there's some extra functionality for keys and encryption, of course. But the basic functionality is similar to tar. Okay. Next, we go into our feedback and questions. Yeah, we got some questions sent to us. First one is Scott with ZFS Mirror on the slog. So he writes, "Hi guys, long-time asynchronous listener, first-time questioner." Okay, so in our last episode during the Q&A section, Alan mentioned that writes to a ZFS Mirror will be at the rate of the slowest disk. This got him thinking about the effect of a slog as a kind of a front end to the mirrored disks, which led him to an article on freenas.org about how to demystify these terms, what a ZIL is and what a slog is. Although it does not mention mirrors, it states that a ZIL exists on every disk. So the questions are, first, are ZILs bound to disks, pools, or VDEFs?
I think the ZIL, or the ZFS intent log, is pool-wide and made up of space on all the devices so that it has the redundancy like the pool does. So it has copies and the redundancy of the pool, so that if ZFS told your database, I've saved that data on the disk, it's actually safe.
Yeah.
And then the slog is the idea of taking that ZIL, and instead of using it as part of the pool, we put it on this special device that's faster.
Yeah, to speed up the operation as a general speed up. Okay, second question is, he asks, if ZILs are bound to VDEFs and not disks, then there is one ZIL per mirror, and what determines where it lives?
So the ZIL is more pool-wide, but it's a matter of where the data ends up getting written. But it's above the level of individual disks. So if you have a mirror, whatever gets written to the ZIL ends up on both sides of the mirror. In case one of them goes away, you can't have the data not still be there.
Yeah, sure. That's the promise that FS does and keeps. Third question is, if ZILs are bound to disks, then does a slog hide multiple ZILs for the pool if the slog is attached, bringing the write speed up to the speed of the slog device, or the slowest of a mirrored pair of slogs, a bit like a caching reverse proxy for writes?
In general, so yes, having the slog or separate intent log is a separate device, and that's where you write. If a database requires a synchronous write, a guarantee that the data is actually safe, you write it to the slog device, and once it's there, which if it's mirrored means on both copies, but if they're both fast SSDs, that should be fast, then the database can be like, okay, that's now safe, I'll continue, and then at some point later on, data will be flushed out to the regular disks. It just, your database won't be made to wait until that's done.
Yeah.
So the slog doesn't cause any less work to happen. It causes more. You write to the SSDs or whatever the slog is, and then sometime later you do the same work you would have done to write it out to the disks. The difference really is that doesn't block the database while that's happening.
The acknowledgement is sent faster up to the application. Yep. Okay. He closes with thanks for a great show, and I'm sure my dog enjoys too as we walk the park.
Yes.
That's cool.
Your dog's like, I'm glad you picked a podcast that's over 2 hours long most weeks.
Yeah, especially with interviews, then you can walk a little bit longer. All right. Thanks for that question. Next up is Trolls with question about compressed arc. Oh, it's really a ZFS part this week. He writes, hi, Alan and Benedict. I have a question regarding the compressed arc feature of ZFS. He's aware that top will display how much compressed data is in RAM and the compression ratio, thanks to Alan's modifications to top. However, he has noticed that on one machine, with hardly any compression enabled, only perhaps some log files that are small to begin with, it will say something like, let's see, this is 9 gigs compressed, 18 gigs uncompressed, and a ratio of 1.98 to 1. Maybe he's just misunderstanding what this means in the first place, but how can there be 9 gigabytes of compressed data in RAM when there is not even 9 gigabytes of compressed data on disk? What is he missing?
So metadata will show up there, but you have less than 9 gigabytes of data on your disk?
So that's the arc, and it's not on the stuff that's on disk.
Right, but
it's the stuff that's
if the
memory.
arc, the arc only caches stuff. So if his whole pool doesn't have 9 gigs of data in it, it would be weird to see 9 gigs of compressed data cached in the arc. But you do have to remember ZFS is also caching its metadata, which doesn't show up as used space in ZFS, right? It's one of the reasons why if you take a 1 terabyte drive and format it ZFS, you don't have a terabyte of free space. Part of it's hard drives lying, but also because ZFS has to store data about your data, where it keeps the file names and the permissions and the checksums and all the other ZFS features. And that metadata compresses very well, and it helps boost that overall compression ratio. But are you sure you don't have 9 gigabytes of data on your disk?
It's basically just data in transit. I mean, all the 4 caches that ZFS has are pretty much also included.
Well, yes, that's all that there is here. So there's 18 gigabytes of actual data, and it's compressed and only taking 9.5 gigs of RAM, giving you a 2-to-1 compression ratio. Yes, some of that will be metadata and stuff. You didn't include like ZFS list or zpool list for us to see how much data you actually had, but the other thing is it can include data that's been deleted. It doesn't fall out of the cache immediately, only when it needs to make room for something else. So maybe that explains it.
Yep. Could be the reason why. Okay, otherwise, send us an updated question or a follow-up. Next is Jeff with FreeBSD Desktop DNS. That's interesting. It's going more into networking, of course. He writes, hello, Alan and Benedict. Great show. Is FreeBSD able to resolve DNS over TCP only? He's trying to perform some testing and need to get FreeBSD 11 to resolve names over TCP only. The following resolves correctly, like host -capital T lowercase t, the A records for google.com, his DNS server IP, and that's giving him using his domain server IP, the address and the aliases, and the Google address for that is being resolved. And resolve.conf doesn't seem to have the option TCP or use -VC.
Yeah, I don't think our resolve.conf supports that. You'd have to extend the resolver library in FreeBSD to support that.
Is there a specific reason why that is? Or, why you would only use TCP?
I'm guessing it's because they want to do something for privacy or something. I'm not sure. I'm not sure why you would want to do that. But
the resolver is not set up to do that.
Because no one's needed to do that before is why it's not an existing feature.
Okay. Last but not least is Jonathan with Beehive and GPU pass-through question. He writes, he currently runs Linux these days with a Windows virtual machine and passed through his GPU to a virtual machine, and it runs pretty well and has so far been able to play or run any app he wants with no problem and near bare metal performance. Oh, that's encouraging. Last time he looked at Beehive, it says GPU pass-through is not supported. He was curious if we guys know anyone that might be working on that bit of Beehive.
I know there's a great deal of desire for that feature, but that it's quite complicated, in particular because Beehive does not emulate a BIOS. It doesn't do the initialization of the video card that's normally done at boot up. I swear that I've heard that a graphics card pass-through into a Beehive can be used for its non-graphics capabilities, like doing CUDA or similar GPU stuff. But for graphics, as far as I know, I'm quite sure that it doesn't work yet, because there would be huge news if that actually started working.
Oh yeah, when people start playing games in Beehive, then.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be certainly good to have.
Yes, it's definitely something people want. It's just a matter of having the resources to actually get it done.
Yep. I have some older NVIDIA GPUs in our big data cluster that are not in use right now, so I could put FreeBSD on that and try running a Beehive and passing it.
It doesn't work yet.
Yeah. It's, well, if someone needs help or test patches or something. But yeah, we're working on this, and we'll, of course, give you information once we're back from Asia BSDCon and BeehiveCon, of course. And that pretty much closes our episode for this week. Again,
Yes.
If you have any questions, feedback, comments, or articles that you found that are interesting for the show, send it to feedback@bsdnow.tv.